الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Hi and welcome to Worlds Apart, a program that is committed to speaking the truth in love. I'm your host, Rommel Gassain, and today we have with us Samuel Green, who will be discussing with us ideologies that are truly worlds apart. First of all, welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to have you come here and share some of your insights with us. Now, we've been talking about many different subjects, and what I would like to talk about on this segment specifically is the Trinity and Tawhid. Now, often Muslims will ask Christians about the Trinity, but rarely do we hear about Christians asking Muslims about the Tawhid. Do you find that to be the case?
Absolutely. I think in our discussions together, it is the Muslim who asks the Christian, explain the Trinity,
Yes.
Explain the Trinity. But I've never met a Christian who says to a Muslim, explain Tawhid.
Yes, and so can you please explain it to us? First, define to us what is Tawhid, and then go about to explain what it is. How do we understand it practically?
Okay. The word Tawhid means to unite. So it's more than just there is one God. It's the idea of keeping the unity of God in everything. I think Christians do themselves a big disservice when they don't learn about Tawhid, because Tawhid is the passion of Islam. Tawhid is the driving force of the Quran. Tawhid is Islamic theology. Tawhid defines what Islamic holiness looks like. For instance, as a Christian, for me to be holy is because I'm made in the image of God. The Bible says, be holy as I am holy.
That's right, reflect His glory, yes.
Yes, and so because we're in the image of God, we're to be holy as God is holy. The Quran never says, be holy as Allah is holy.
Wow.
What it says is, what Tawhid teaches is that you're to have the oneness of God in every area of life. And so really, if we want to understand our Muslim friends, we need to feel this passion. It's almost the passion the Christian might have for the gospel, is the same type of passion that a Christian might have for this idea of Tawhid and having the oneness of God in every area of life.
So in other words, God is His own separate entity, and creation is its own separate entity. You can't connect the two. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, certainly Islam doesn't have the doctrine of the image of God, that God made us in His image and so created a connection between Himself and His creation.
Yes.
And the doctrine of Tawhid is that creation is to maintain and to be faithful to the oneness of God.
Okay. Now, Muslims often accuse Christians of being polytheists. And when you try and explain or describe to them, what the Trinity is, they think, well, you worship 2 or 3 gods. And so when we try and explain that to them, it seems to be confusing to them. On what grounds? Is it because they think that we don't believe that God is one? I'm just trying to understand their mindset.
Certainly for the Muslim, the belief in one God is the driving force.
Yes.
And so when they hear anything about the Trinity, it just sounds like you've compromised that, and you've compromised your belief in God at the most fundamental point. And so for them, any type of explanation, any type of content, if it's not explained well, just seems, not to be worth listening to. And for many Christians, they haven't really studied it in detail, and so it's that they may not be in a position to really explain it.
Okay. So is it true that Muslims don't associate anything with God? Let's look at that practically.
Look, Muslims are not meant to associate anyone with God. It's one of the big beliefs in Islam. And it's one of the ways that they challenge Christians on this point. So before I answer your question, I think we need to take a step back and look at what the Quran itself says. One of the key verses in understanding this is from Surah 3,
So that's a Quran that you're reading from?
Yes, I've got it. So I've got a Quran here, and in Surah 3, verse 64, it says, "Qul ya ahla al-kitabi ta'aelu ila kalimatin sawa'in bainana wa bainakum." Now this is saying, say to the people of the book, and it's actually encouraging Muslims to speak to Christians, but also to make it clear that they believe something different to them, and it's a call to Christians to accept Islam. And it says, say to the people of the book, let us come to a common word between us and you, that we will worship none but Allah, and that we will not associate with him anything, and that we will not take from amongst ourselves any lords. And so you can see this definition of what Tawhid is. It's more than just polytheism or idolatry. It's that you don't associate anything with Allah.
Wow.
Right, so it's nushrika, where are we here? Nushrika bihi shayan, that we do not associate with him anything, and that we do not take lords from amongst ourselves. So there are to be no lifting up of human lords in association with God. There is to be nothing at all associated with God in any way. It is to be Allah alone. And then it says, if they don't listen to you, then you're to say, we are Muslims, and to leave it at that. And so this is a very influential verse. Now, you've said here, though, do Muslims actually associate anything with God? And I would argue that they do.
Wow, I'm rather surprised that they actually do, because this is a central doctrine for them. And often they will say that, this is a great sin, the sin of shirk. Is that right?
Absolutely. Sin is the worst sin you can commit. And the common Muslim belief will be that people may go to hell, but those who haven't committed shirk will be able to get out in time. But if you've committed shirk, you'll stay there forever. So to associate anything with God is the worst of sins, is the unforgivable sin.
So then give me some real examples. How do they associate anything with God, that is Muslims?
Sure. In order to do this, I think we need to look at the Islamic documents themselves. And so I'd like us to consider not just some odd practice here or there, but to actually look at the regular things that are happening in Islam and the common things that a Muslim, that all Muslims would experience.
So these are credible things.
These are credible things.
Yes.
I think the first one that we need to consider is Hajj. As you would know, Muslims are required to go on Hajj once in their life, being able to do so. But one of the practices in Hajj is to kiss a black stone. Now, this black stone is a stone. It's a rock that's there, and it was there being kissed before Muhammad's day, and it still continued to be kissed today. I've got a hadith here.
And this is located on the Kaaba, I believe itself, one of the corners?
It's been built into the wall of the Kaaba.
Uh-huh.
That's correct. Let me just read to you from a manual of fiqh and sunnah. This is a book which tells Muslims how to do what they do.
Yes.
Let me just read here. It says, Bukhari, Muslim and Abu Dawud reported that Umar approached the black stone and kissed it. Then he said, I know that you are a mere stone, that you can neither harm nor do any good. If I had not seen the Prophet, peace be upon him, kissing you, I would have never kissed you. Al-Katabi said, this shows that abiding by the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is binding, regardless of whether or not we understand its reason or the wisdom behind it. Such information devolves obligation on those to whom it reaches, even if they may not fully comprehend its significance. It is known, however, that kissing the black stone signifies respect for it, recognition of our obligation toward it, and using it as a means of seeking Allah's blessing. Indeed, Allah has preferred some stones over others, as He has preferred some cities and countries and days and nights and months over others. The underlying spirit of all this is unquestioning submission to Allah. Now, I find that disturbing.
How so?
Well, because they are saying that they are using it as a means of seeking Allah's blessing. And you can see that the early Muslims were actually uncomfortable with this. Umar approaches the stone and said, I would never do this, but I saw Muhammad do it.
That's right. I mean, when you kiss something, it's a sign of affection towards it. But here we have this inanimate object and they're kissing it, and it seems as though you're giving some type of adoration or worship to God or seeking His favor as you described it.
Certainly, it is because this is part of the practice of Hajj. In doing this, you are seeking the blessing of God, because that is why they go to Mecca, to fulfill their duty and to earn their good deeds before Allah by doing these things. So kissing this black stone is part of earning your good deeds. The problem is, though, that this is associating something with Allah, this stone.
Yes.
It's also disturbing because of what the law of Moses and the prophets actually teach about stones. You see, not only does the law of Moses say that we must not have idols, which we would agree on, but it also says something else. Let me read to you from the law of Moses in the book of Leviticus. It says, do not make idols or set up an image or a sacred stone for yourself, and do not place a carved stone in your land to bow down before it. Now, this is very clear that not only are we not to have idols, but we're not to have sacred stones.
Yes.
Yet, we find this in Islam, and we actually find Muhammad continuing this practice and doing it himself. And so it is clearly shirk. This is clearly an example of shirk.
That's amazing. I mean, and you can understand why the law of Moses actually says that. And we also read it in Exodus chapter 20, where we read the commandments there. The first and second commandment, which says you can only have one God. There is only one true God, and you shall not worship anything else or set up any other image, whether it's in heaven or anything in the water, and associate it with God. The very first two commandments. And we can understand why God would say such a thing. It's because now we are connecting Him with a thing. Yet He is the invisible God, the God that cannot be seen, the God that resides in heaven. And to be able to do something like that, it almost seems the attention now is on that thing. Would that be right? Rather than on God Himself?
Well, absolutely. Or seeing that thing as a way of approaching God or getting blessing for God in some way. But it's associating it with Him. And this is why Muslims, and there are Muslims today who feel uncomfortable with this, because it is logically, it's just illogical to be kissing a black stone and seeking Allah's blessing through it, because that is shirk. That is the definition of shirk. It's shirk as defined by the law of Moses, and it's very clear that it is.
Now, that's one example you've given us. Is there another example where Muslims perhaps might be connecting something or associating something with God, or someone or something that might be seen as a partner with God?
Absolutely. I'd like us to go back to the law of Moses again.
Okay.
Because in the law of Moses, we hear some famous words that are spoken by Jesus and the Jewish people. It's called the Shema. And the Shema is what Jewish people would say to confess their belief in God. And it is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Yes, and all Christians believe that.
And it is something that we say, but it's in the law of Moses. It's a very famous statement. You'll notice, though, it doesn't say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and Moses is his prophet. You never have to say that.
No way.
You never have to say that.
That's right.
Now, it's similar for us as Christians. We confess the Father, Son, and the Spirit, all God.
Yes.
We don't say, and Paul is his apostle. We never associate Paul with God like that. But when we think of Islam, Muhammad is associated with Allah in the Shahada. So in the Shahada it says, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And if you want to become a Muslim, it's not just enough to say, there is no God but Allah. That's not enough. You must confess, and Muhammad is his prophet.
Wow.
I think I saw this most clearly when I was visiting a mosque the other day, and I was looking at the direction of prayer, the Qibla, and within the mosque there'll be one wall which is the direction of prayer. And it had written up on there in the Arabic, there is no God but Allah, and right next to it at the same level to which everyone was facing, and Muhammad is his prophet. And so you see, Muhammad is associated always in the Shahada. And if you want to become a Muslim, you must confess Muhammad as you confess Allah. And in fact, there are many verses in the Quran which will say things like, you must put your faith in Muhammad. and we'll say in Muhammad and in Allah, and the two just go together.
I mean, what you're saying here is quite amazing. I mean, this is stuff that Christians and Muslims need to know. I mean, we've been taught as Christians that you can't associate anything with God. To do so is blasphemy. To do so is really the original sin. That's what the devil tried to do. He wanted the place of God. But we understand through the law of Moses, through the prophets, and through the Psalms that there is only one God, and only Him alone can be worshipped, and He has no equals, He has no partner, and He never ever elevates any prophets to His standard. Now I'd like to ask you a specific question. Why is it that God has never taken a prophet and He's associated Himself or lifted him up to His standard?
Why has God not done that? Well, it's because, as you've been saying, it's inappropriate.
Why? What's wrong with us?
Because we are sinful, we fail, and...
The prophets of God?
Yes, the prophets of God, they even fail.
Wow, I mean, that's an amazing... But I thought a prophet is perfect. He's supposed to be, a type of saint. Is that the case?
Look, in the Bible, it records the prophet's successes, but it also records the prophet's failures. For Muslims, that they find that difficult. They say this is unacceptable behaviour. But what Muslims need to understand is that the prophets in the Quran are much closer to what Christians would see as hagiography, or the worship of saints that developed in later centuries in Christianity, where certain Christians, because of their righteous deeds, were held up more than just examples, but as intercessors before God. And this is the way prophets are spoken of in the Quran, that they may have some type of failing. There is still, Jonah is called the reprobate, and there is some failing of the prophets in the Quran. But really, they're more than just what we mean by a prophet as Christians. They are now much more these intercessory saints before God.
But it's quite clear that there is no prophet for many reasons, and that being one reason, that they are sinners. They can never be associated or become partners with God.
Yes, and God won't share His glory with anyone else.
That's right.
God's glory is all for Him.
Yes. And so now we understand it, and we can see that there are some examples. I'm not sure if there are any other examples that you'd like to share with us.
There's still one more.
Okay.
As I'm sure you would know, Muslims pray 5 times a day.
Yes.
Or 3 times a day for Shias. And they have these set prayers. Now, within these prayers, actually Muhammad is prayed to as part of those prayers.
Muhammad is prayed to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Within those prayers it says, let me read it here, it says, "Greetings to you, O Prophet, and the mercy and blessing of Allah be with you." And so they actually address Muhammad. Now, notice that phrase. It's not saying we believe in Muhammad as the Prophet of Allah, that would just be speaking about Muhammad and praying to God about Muhammad. This is actually greeting Muhammad.
They're talking to him.
They're actually talking to him.
Yes.
You know how Muslims will say, Assalamu alaikum. It's a greeting. And you say that to a person. Well, they're using that same phrase here to Muhammad, and they're actually addressing Muhammad in their prayers. Now, this is shirk. This is including, prayer is to be to God alone. It's not to be to Muhammad. And so when Muslims 5 times a day say this, they're actually committing shirk. Now, it's interesting. I've been reading my way through the Quran, and it talks about, let me find it for you here.
I think it's an amazing, while you find that passage, it's an amazing thing too, because Muslims understand and believe that Muhammad died. So to be able to talk with him, that's saying that he's eternal, or he's still alive. Would that be right?
Well, yes. Obviously, they honour him so much that they feel they can do this.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. Yes,
yeah.
Okay.
So I was reading the Quran the other day, and it said in Surah 46, verse 5, that Muhammad is commanded to rebuke the Meccans and to say you shouldn't be praying to those you associate with Allah because they're unconscious. And it says, why are you praying to people who are unconscious and won't be conscious till the day of resurrection? But this is actually the case with Muhammad.
That's right.
Muhammad is dead. He's buried in Medina, and he won't be conscious till the day of resurrection. And so when Muslims are greeting him, this command of the Quran actually applies to what they're doing.
Yes. And so then, do Muslims know this? Do they realize this? Or is this just something that they're just so used to, they haven't really sort of stopped and said, what we're doing here really isn't right? That's actually, it goes against something that we believe.
I guess for many Muslims, they're saying their prayers in Arabic and they may not fully understand what they're saying.
Okay.
And so this is just...
They've just memorised it.
They've memorised it, that they've grown up saying it, and maybe no one's ever challenged them about it. And I guess what I'm wanting to say is, when a Muslim wants to attack the Trinity and say the Trinity is this, the Trinity is that, my first thing I want to say to them is, well, let's look at Tawhid, because you're kissing a black stone, you're including Muhammad in your prayers, and you're including Muhammad in your confession of God. So please explain Tawhid and the logic of that before you attack the Trinity. I'm happy to go to the law of Moses and look at what it says about the Father, Son and the Spirit, because really when we want to look at the Trinity, and maybe we need to do that soon, when we want to look at the Trinity, we see that the Father, Son and Spirit, and that relationship is there in the law of Moses. It's there throughout the prophets, it's there in the Psalms, and it's there in the Gospel.
Can you give us a couple of examples how it is there?
Sure. Well, the Father, Son and Spirit is the central relationship through all the prophets. Israel is called the Son of God, and God is called the Father in the book of Moses. And it says that God sent His Spirit to live in His Son, to live in Israel, and the Spirit inspires the prophets. The Spirit builds the tent in which God will dwell, and then God dwells amongst His people. And so we see Father, Son and Spirit. And then in 2 Samuel 7 in the prophets, we see that God sent His Spirit on the Messiah, on King David, and that the covenant He makes with David is that he will be the father of the Messiah, and the Messiah will be called the Son of God, and the Messiah will receive the Spirit of God. And so again, we see Father, Son and Spirit, that relationship, not just with the nation of Israel, but now with the Messiah. Then as we keep moving through the prophets, we see that the kings of Israel, the Messiahs of Israel, turned away from God and didn't reflect Him properly. And so God promises to send His true Son, and this will be the true Spirit-filled Son. You see this particularly in the book of Isaiah, which talks about the this true Messiah, this true Son of God who will come, who will be filled with the spirit of wisdom and revelation, and He will come and do what we have failed to do. He will bring glory to God's name. He is the one who will bring salvation to God's people and will bring God's judgment to this earth. And so the prophets before Jesus finish with a promise of God the Father sending His Spirit-filled Son to do all the things that we can't do. That's how the prophets before Jesus end. That's their message. And so when Jesus comes and He is the Son, the Spirit-filled Son, giving the Spirit, calling God Father, all of this is completely in line with all the prophets who were before it. Now, there's much more that could be said, but I want to assure you that what Christians are saying about Jesus has its grounding in all the prophets. It's not something that they made up.
That's right. It's not something that's become a fabrication which developed after Jesus or anything like that. And it's so central for Muslims to be able to understand that the Bible has not been corrupted, that Christians don't believe in, polytheism, and that Christians don't believe that, that they can associate themselves with God. No, all we're doing is interpreting what the law of Moses says, what the prophets say, what the Psalms say, and what the Injil, the Gospels say. And I think if we can get that point across, I think now we would be ready to be able, as Muslims, to be able to go back and perhaps read the Scriptures. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, there is no better thing that we can do than to hear from God, to listen to His Word, to read all His prophets.
Yes. Sam, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
To our viewers, we really hope that you found this episode to be informative. Now, I would like to stress one thing too, and that is, don't just simply take these things on board and run with them. We want you to check them out for yourselves. If there's questions that are in your mind, please look at some of the sources that we have referenced and study them. and ask God to help you to reveal Himself to you and find out whether these things be so or not. Until then, please stay in tune for the very next episode of Worlds Apart, and may God bless you.